All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let the Tech Out. Today, we have a great guest, Tessa McIver, and we're going to be talking about venture capital and women and the whole world, how it looks like, and why we have, if we have, so few women there. Just to briefly introduce Tessa, she's, of course, our subject matter expert now. She's the community manager at Warsaw Equity Group, previously the head of alumni development at MIT Enterprise Forum CEE. And she's also a co-founder and CEO of FixMix. That's her startup. And today we're going to, as I said, we're going to talk about women in VCs in this whole world, because I think that it's still not a very common topic to talk about. Tessa, welcome to our podcast. It's really, really cool to have you here with us.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, and I'm absolutely delighted to join you. Let's hope we can tick off all the topics we want to cover today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let's then start with our main topic. So one of the questions we asked during our previous conversation was why actually the official number of female VCs is difficult to get. There are different reports. I did some research, and for example, I found a report prepared by European Women VC. They state that actually the numbers since I think it was 2018 have fallen to only 16%. And the main comment was that the investors and recruiters say that the general outflow of female talent is likely linked to dissatisfaction with this male-dominated industry, and the fact that many funds are slowing investing, and this is why it's more difficult in this funding environment. So before we tackle, because I think it's a huge issue, I would like to ask you to give us a short intro to your background in the startup world, because you're a woman. You also entered the startup world a few years ago, so you're not the we could call it startup child from the very early ages. So we would be very interested in hearing your experience first of entering this world.
Yeah, of course. Happy to share. So I pivoted into the startup ecosystem after a number of years in a corporate role. I definitely wanted to change my working reality, and wanted, I suppose, to do something where I really felt I could bring more value that, ultimately in a corporation, I obviously I'm generalizing, but you're a small cog in a very big wheel. And although I would like to think I did bring value, still it's somehow watered down, and the impact I felt I could make was not as significant as perhaps in the startup ecosystem. What I was slightly shocked about when I sort of made this decision, it was also at the same time that I was doing an executive MBA, which definitely was something that opened my eyes to innovation and technology and, this sort of exciting world that I didn't know anything about previously, to be completely honest. I was sort of sitting in my room at the top of a tall building, doing my corporate thing, and I thought, well, this is fascinating. These people who are, sort of trying to somehow change the world and create these, crazy innovations. And, that's something I'd really like to be part of. But what I found, surprising was at first that I was very much shunted out of this world. I thought, well, I've got a fantastic CV. I've got years of experience, got, I'm sure very easily transferable skills. I've got this MBA, and, I'm sure this new world is going to welcome me with open arms. And they didn't, I got a lot of pushback of you've got corporate experience, you have no startup experience, go away basically and come back when you know something more about this world. So that's what I did. I threw myself, and I thought, well, I'm going to admit defeat here. And yeah, indeed, I set up my own startup with a group of 4 co-founders. I also started working for various more scale-ups rather than startups to gain some experience. I threw myself very proactively into attending various startup events around Warsaw. So to try and find out as much as possible about this world and grow a network, I suppose, within the startup ecosystem. And so for a number of years, that journey has progressed and deepened. When it comes to being a woman, I don't think the pushback was initially because I was a woman. I think it was simply, which is true of many industries or sectors, that people think, you need to have direct experience in a specific sector, which to a point is true. But then, of course, there are so many transferable skills between different sectors. So actually, the experience I had in other, sectors certainly did transfer over in the end. Once I'd, got my head around what actually, the startup ecosystem, how it works, who are the key players, et cetera, et cetera.
So it was like one of the main arguments why they told you, well, okay, you're a corporate animal. You don't really fit to our world.
Corporations and startups function in a very different way. I like one of the comparisons that I recently heard, that a corporation is like a, massive container boat, that is shipping products, very slowly but stably, whereas, a startup is like a speedboat that, is sort of zigzagging around very quickly, but, ultimately is very agile, it's moving quickly, is very open to failure, which corporations generally are not. So, there's a very different makeup behind startups and corporations. And I felt that obviously if I'd been sitting on this big container ship for a number of years, would I understand this agile, innovative, fast-paced reality, I suppose.
Well, we both work together in I would say, very corporate organization. And I think, and now when working in IT, it's still, again, a corporation, but we work in Agile. I think it takes a while to change the mindset, but it's definitely possible. So do you observe this kind of fall of women in VCs that the report I quoted is actually hitting on? Do you think this is the case from your perspective as a person, inside?
I really can't say statistically because I don't know the statistics and I don't know whether these statistics also relate to globally or whether they relate to Europe or Poland. So I wouldn't like to.
That was to Europe.
Okay, so I mean, what I can say, I don't know whether the number of women working in VCs has gone up or gone down or stayed the same. But certainly, what I can say is that there are very few women in VCs in Poland. I think it's probably slightly more. I've come across from what I observed, slightly more maybe in Western Europe, but still it is a male-dominated industry predominantly. And certainly in Poland, there are some women, well, I'm one of them working in VCs, but also I think, they're more likely to be in roles that are not directly financial role. So that is for sure something that I can observe and confirm.
That's interesting for me, what you said about being this container ship instead of a speedboat. While researching for this episode, I encountered post on Startups magazine stating that the rules of becoming a quote-unquote sophisticated investor changed a bit since the beginning of February 2024. And one must either be a director of a company with a turnover of £1.6 million, have been part of an angel syndicate for the previous 6 months, or have worked professionally in private equity for 2 years. And from my observation in the software house world and startup world, it's not only about being agile and having experience with highly changing, chaotic almost environments, but also about who knows who and the experience with big money. I was quite surprised after this lecture that you were pushed back while trying to fit into this world.
I think business is always about who knows who. I think, in absolutely any industry, your network is such an important part of your progression. What for? Within my almost 20-year career, the fact that I've known people has definitely been an input, because people also ask around and say, what do you think of this person, what is their work ethic? There's only so much you can gain, obviously, from somebody's CV and from a job interview, but a lot is simply opinions, or somebody that recommends you are also going to look more favorably at somebody who comes with a recommendation than somebody who absolutely nothing about other than the piece of paper with their CV on it. I don't think the VC world is particularly different in that respect. I think certainly from my experience, all industries are very much who does make a big difference on whether you're going to be invited in. But I didn't know people from the startup ecosystem. That was not a world I was part of. So that's dramatically changed over the years. And as I said, I made a huge effort to grow a network within the startup ecosystem. But when I came up with the idea of, I would like to be part of, the startup ecosystem, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any track record within, that industry. So, I can understand. I was surprised because I thought I was I had in my mind that I was a very attractive candidate for anything. Whereas, I'm joking, of course, but ultimately I understand why that pushback did happen, because I didn't have that track record within this, industry.
So it's more like those two factors come together. The experience, which is quite hard to get for many women across the world. Still, the C level is male dominated, I guess. But I think women are naturally more agile, more prone to change.
I don't know what the statistics are. I think last time I saw it was around, 15% of startup founders are women. I may be wrong on the exact figures, but, it's certainly not a very large number. And indeed, as we've already discussed, the number of women in VCs is also tiny. But I don't think the number of women founders is a result of the industry not welcoming to women founders, to be completely honest. I think that it's more of a deeper social issue of women not throwing themselves into, I'm not blaming women for not doing that, but, it's a highly risky job. Incredibly time demanding. I mean, I think some people are under the misconception that, in a corporation, for example, you're working 24/7, and then, why not start your own company and have a better work-life balance? In a way, I think it's completely the opposite. Once you have your own company, you're working 24/7 to develop it. Whereas, with a corporation, ultimately, you have in your work contract that you work till, 5 or 6 or whatever it is, and ultimately you can go leave the office and shut the door. Whereas when it's your own business, the approach is completely different. As we know, women are incredibly hard workers, and we can see many examples of women who work a lot more harder than men. I don't want to generalize like that, because there are so many different examples of different people. But what I'm trying to say is that women are not scared off by being a startup founder because it's hard work. But I think the demand on time can be a bit off-putting. Not from women are, certainly if they have. I mean, this is maybe going a bit too deep into the topic. But if they have decided that they want to have families and kids, usually they are unfortunately still the number one person who is running the household, who is with the children, which makes it very difficult to also give 24/7 to your business, right? That's certainly something that I can see. I mean, I can give an example that maybe addresses this topic quite well. I have 3 children. I've always been very dedicated to any job I have. My husband also has 3 children and is very dedicated to his work. And yet the number of times I've heard from various people like, oh, but where are your children right now? If you're at work, if you're on a work trip, they're sort of preoccupied with, but who's looking after my children? And I, after some years, asked my husband, has anybody ever asked you, but who's with your children right now when you're on a work trip, wherever? And he said, no, never, but obviously we all have somehow in our minds that it's okay for the male to develop their career, develop their, what they're doing. Whereas with the mother, it's always, oh, but who's looking after the children? That the priority number one should be the children. I'm not saying that's bad, but that is still the social norm. Certainly in a country like Poland, probably more so than for example in the UK where I'm from. I'm not saying that it's completely the way things should be, but probably that norm is less obvious than in Poland. And simply, I think it's deciding to build your own company, which is going to be very unfinancially stable for a number of years. If ever, the failure rate of startups is huge. Plus, something that actually is going to demand, if you're going to make a success of it, a huge amount of time input. I think, can be slightly off-putting. But the women I know who have decided to found their own startups, I would really make the bold guess that are statistically more likely to make a success of it. I know hundreds of male founders. Some have managed to be successful, some have not. Whereas I know a very small number of female founders, but almost all of them have actually managed to differentiate themselves and actually make a huge success of their startup. And so many have actually, I've discussed this topic with many of them, and many have said to me, actually, the fact that I was the only woman in the room made me stand out. Use your differences actually as your strength, right? But I do think it's not a case of women feeling unwelcome or not having the opportunity to get into this space. I think it is more that society still does not maybe empower women to make a very difficult career choice with little stability ahead of other potential choices.
Do you think that maybe it already exists in Poland, for example, a community of female, and then we can also go a bit further to non-binary people? So on the one hand, to create such a community for business angels, and then the other community also for female founders, right? Do you think that would help? And maybe it already exists.
I mean, there are various, groups. I'm part of one quite small group of 10 ladies who work in VC funds as more of a social group. But, there are various networks and groups that focus on women. There are various also programs that I've seen, whether they're acceleration programs or simply mentoring programs that are focused on women. So I do think these things do exist. But to be honest, sometimes I think they can backfire. What increasingly personally makes my blood almost boil is at a conference, some sort of startup conference or tech conference, where you have, the panel about financing, the panel about, I don't know, ESG, whatever the different panels are. And then suddenly you have the women's panel. You've had all men on the ESG panel. Maybe you've had one woman, but, then you have the women's panel where, they've brought out 4 women who, sort of, to be honest, quite often will sit and complain about how hard time they have of being a woman. And I think it gives a really bad rep to women, these sorts of panels. I'm far more about let's make sure that on the finance panel you have 2 women and 2 men. Let's make sure that each panel has diversity within it, rather than boxing the women into a separate panel and saying, this is the women's panel where, the men in the room simply, leave at that stage and decide to go and have a coffee.
That's what I wanted to say. It's then I think me as a woman, I will be also okay, well, this is not very informative. I mean, I'm a woman. I know how, females' body work.
Yeah, so I think there's a fine line between obviously trying to ensure that women are given, if not equal, but sometimes more opportunity in a world where they have a lot less representation, but between also singling women out into a different group and sort of saying it's them and us. I don't think that's very constructive. And yet I very much see, on various conferences that we are invited to create panels for whatever, or simply to nominate speakers. Almost always conference organizers increasingly in the last year will say, could you make sure that there is a good gender mix on the panel? So I think those sorts of things are good, that you can see a change, that increasingly it's unlikely that I'll go to a conference and see a panel just of men, because that is, being paid attention to. But they are small changes, small steps.
But on the side note, it's still better than a group of men discussing female health and being on a regulatory committee. And the other curious thing is that one of the design conferences made up an AI avatar to market their inclusive design panel, even though there are hundreds of speakers willing to participate in such discussions.
That's a valid point, actually. So looking at this is something like my question. It's a hypothetical question, of course, but let's say I have the funds, I have the money, I want to invest in a startup, but I don't know you, Tessa. So how do I start looking for any information, for creating any relations, getting more knowledge around it?
Well, I mean, I think if you've got the money and you want to invest it into startups, you want to become an angel investor, I think probably the first place you go is to angel organizations. There are various organizations that will help you with that. So I don't think, I think having money that you want to put somewhere is never going to be
The problem.
yeah, too much of a problem. I think it's more difficult the other way around. If you're a startup who wants to raise money, I think you would be unwise, to, let's say you have your pool of money that you want to invest, to simply, go out and do it completely if you have no knowledge of technology and startups and trends and what you actually want to get out of your investment. I think you'd be unwise to go and simply find a project you like. I mean, I did hear once one piece of advice of, if you're going to invest in something, make sure it's something that you do like and that you somehow understand. But then I've heard many more opinions saying that should be completely irrelevant. But it depends also what your end game is. If you want to get a good return, in that case, actually liking the solution probably is irrelevant, but probably having some sort of understanding of it, is vital, because otherwise you have no idea, what potential this product has. But I know various angel investors, and this includes female angel investors, who, simply have projects that are very close to their heart, in various areas that they very much support. And of course, they don't want to lose money, but they're not necessarily making the investment purely on a financial basis, but also because they really want to give their input into a startup that has a mission that they believe in. But usually in the case of most angel investors, they will invest into projects where they can actually give a proactive help, apart from the fact that they've given some sort of financial addition, but where they, do have themselves some sort of expertise, can mentor the startup or link them with some industry experts or whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, as with any sort of investment, it depends what you're looking to achieve, whether it's simply a financial success or an impact on society. But certainly, I think, you do need to know A, what you want to get out of it, and B, if you're investing in a specific type of technology, somehow you're not going to become an expert overnight, but at least do your homework on that specific technology.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see, and that might be some kind of like a topic for the future. If there is a difference, what is the difference between female and male business angels, and what different technologies to invest in, right? Whether it's, I don't know if you have any.
I think this is also one of the reasons why maybe it's difficult to gather data, that specifically in the case of angel investors, many will not want to go public with the fact that they are investing money, right? It's something they've made a decision to do. Thinking of one specific case where a female angel investor who's invested into, I think, 2 or 3 companies, but she told me, I really do not want anyone to find out about this, because once when it slipped that I had indeed invested into whatever company, I had a line of startups knocking on my door, and she said, but I'm not an investor. That was very much a side thing. This was very specific projects that I invested in because they were close to my heart, but her core business is completely something else. She's in this ecosystem, but she's not an investor. That's not her day job, So she said, she does everything to ensure that it doesn't get out into the world that she's investing. If you announce that you have money, then you're always going to get a line of people knocking. I'm sure it's true of many, many male angel investors as well. Some are very happy to be public about it, but others, are considering it really is their private money. They don't necessarily want anybody to know what cards they're playing. So yeah, I think that makes it quite difficult to gather statistics. But certainly when you look at, I don't know, there's Coben Angels, for example, which I think is the biggest Polish of angel investors. I think they have very few as well females in that group. But as I said, that's just true of the whole industry, as we've already discussed. So
I wish that one day the answer to your question, Magda, what's the difference between female and male VC is the biological sex only. Like, this would be the first that comes to mind instead of like the set of traits and characteristics.
yeah, I mean, of course, but then I think, it would be a big generalization to say there are female personality traits and male personality traits. But, to some extent there are, right? I mean, women are statistically proven to have a different risk aversion to men or different statistically ability to multitask or whatever. So I think there are certain personality traits which will always make the quality. I mean, of course, they are all generalizations, but the generalizations come from somewhere, I guess, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, we still generalize men as well. But yeah, that's another topic.
For me, it looks like it still boils down to the fact, which we have in many different industries, that, we as girls, we're being trained into a particular direction, non-technological, non-financial. It's rather go and learn, languages, go and learn how to write an essay, and go and do some artsy stuff. And this is why then we get the kind of the fruits of this education now when we're, for example, talking about startups, VCs, everything, that we're still in need for more women and more diversity.
Yeah, but I think, that it's kind of almost a positioning by society. I think this all stems from, to be honest, primary education or even, nursery education. And obviously how small children are positioned by their families and so on and so on. I mean, obviously, the majority of people want nothing but the best for small children who will become the future. But I think there's a lot of brainwashing from an early age of these stereotypes. And I think it all goes up through the university level to suddenly say to the ladies, right, you've kind of been brainwashed all your life that you should be, I don't know, doing something arty. And now, why don't you throw that all in the corner and do finance stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's something that really needs to come from like the very first informative years. And in a way, I think actually what is key as well is almost the family model, right? Of actually empowering men to look after kids and to make it a complete norm that the father takes paternity leave or whatever, and it's completely okay for a woman to focus on her career, as I previously mentioned with this, who's looking after the children question that I often receive. But I had the same at school meetings. I found this actually, well, it was not funny, it's actually quite sad, but I was always predominantly the person who went to the school meetings of my kids' school meetings. But I had in my previous job, I ran every Wednesday workshop for startup founders. And I couldn't really change that. That was something that when I accepted the role, like, this is Wednesdays, this is when we do this. And unfortunately, the school meetings were always on a Wednesday. So for 2 years, I didn't go to the school meetings. They weren't every month, they were every quarter or whatever. And my husband went instead. But, I'd been the number one person going for many years beforehand. If there was a more important meeting, then I'd get a colleague to cover me and I would, of course, be there. But most of them, were pretty basic meetings. And I got a lot of negative feedback then from the school saying, well, you obviously don't care about your children because you're not coming to these meetings. Whereas nobody had commented that for, 6 years previously, my husband had barely ever turned up at these meetings. And of course, I felt I had to explain myself. And I said, well, unfortunately, I simply run a workshop at the clashing time, and they said, oh, well, you're putting your career above your children, which I don't think anyone would ever say to a man,
No.
Well, nobody certainly would say that to my husband. So I think, that type of stereotype is actually what causes women very subconsciously, because I don't think it's conscious, but I think it's very often subconsciously, to make different choices, career choices, or choose different, maybe industries that are not as difficult or as intense as, let's say, finance or IT, because they've been conditioned in a different way from even from how their mothers are treated, right?
I'm just curious, was this comment from the school of your kids? Did it come from a woman or a male teacher?
Yeah, no, from several. It wasn't just from one teacher. It was from several teachers in different circumstances who asked why I'm not there. It was very much noticed that I hadn't been, these weeks, but it was all female teachers. Simply the question about, who's looking after your children, I received from men, women, people I very much like and admire, but females who'd say, but where are your children? They wouldn't think to ask the same of a man, because it was just taken for granted that, of course, if the man is on the other side of the world from his children, the wife is for sure looking after them, right? And they are safe and so on. So there's no need to worry. Whereas the reverse, I'm laughing because I just find it a bit ridiculous. But, that is almost a subconscious,
Well, sometimes you can ask it just because, you care, right? But you then need to know this person pretty well to ask this question, because then it's like, the intention is not like, ooh, if you're such a great, business lady, what do you do with your kids, right?
But yeah, generally though, sort of maybe somehow summarizing, although there are so many of these inequalities and so on and so on, I always try to look the positive way and take out the positive things and be positive that changes are going in the right directions. And actually, I do believe that in any industry, if a woman puts her mind to it, I'm not saying she may not have to try a little bit harder, but sometimes, she'll just simply differentiate herself, like the female founders that I know, by being the only woman in the room. So, everything is achievable to anyone who is determined to do it, irrelevant of sex or whatever status. I think ultimately we do have an open enough world that if you want to achieve something and you put your mind to it, then despite all barriers, you can achieve it.
And you can always find, some female mentors as well who have families, for example, or have experience on, how to tackle those issues.
Yeah, of course.
Magda asked how to run a startup, how to start a venture like this, but how to become an angel investor?
Well, I think, to become an angel investor, you need to simply have the money. And then, if you don't have money, you're not going to become an angel investor. So I think that's your starting point, which means that you most probably have had a huge business success in whatever it is your core area is. So, if you have the disposable income to be able to invest, you either become part of a business angel group, but generally, presumably, if you've made enough money to be able to then invest it, you are an expert in a specific area, right? Most probably, I would imagine that you're going to want to invest in the area that you do feel you have an expertise in, but otherwise you probably need to gain that expertise to be able to make a wise choice, or you become the LP, the limited partner of a venture capital and trust in their judgment. That's also another option. And then you're putting your trust and money into the judging that the experts are the ones in the VC fund who make that decision. Whereas, how to become a startup founder, well, that's something I think we would need, many hours. But I think, it's something that, you need to decide that is a lifestyle choice you want to make, that you are prepared to make, that you understand that, it's not the easy option, because it's certainly not, but you need to actually have an idea as well of what sort of technology you're going to create. I think there's an abundance and a never-ending amount of ideas that people can come up with, but then you need to make sure that, it's an idea that actually people want, that you're solving a solution that actually is a problem to somebody, that you want to create a product or service that people are going to be willing to pay money for. And then there are so many different elements of building that business and then scaling that business. And there's the financing side of it, the sales side of things. There are so many different elements which you are, as a startup founder, juggling and multitasking before you probably have enough money to actually, hire a team and have the specific experts doing their specific roles. So you're kind of, doing everything for some time, which is, indeed part of the reason why it's not the easy option. because you'll probably have to learn a huge number of skills that you didn't necessarily specifically have before such a journey. But, it's certainly an exciting one. And I love working with startup founders. They give me a huge amount of energy, partly because they are usually, and I say this in a very positive sense, but a little bit crazy, a little bit wacky, very creative, and actually willing to take a huge risk and follow their passions very often, not always, but very often, what they are creating are solutions that actually in some, even if it's small little bit, can make the world a better place. Those are certainly the projects that get me most excited. It's fantastic if somebody invents some sort of marketing solution that shortens the length of time for something, but I don't personally get as, I think, well done. You're very intelligent to have created this, but ultimately whether it takes some tech 2 seconds less to do something, I personally don't get as excited as the solutions that are making our planet greener, or indeed helping with some sort of inequality or something. These are the ones that's certainly fantastic, that somebody's dedicating their time, hoping to make money out of it so that they can live and pay their bills, but as well, actually adding to a progressive world.
Yeah, so you have to be some kind of like an idealist that, you have a vision, you go for it, no matter what.
I would slightly disagree in that, you also have to know when you're doing something wrong. And with startups, there's such a big element of trial and error in a way. You can't be an idealist because, you have to be able to turn around and say, no, I thought this was great, but it's not working. We need to pivot the idea, or you need to know when to say, okay, I'm in love with my idea, but actually it doesn't work. Nobody wants it. So this is absolutely pointless. I think you should learn a huge dose of honesty and acceptance of failure, and indeed knowing when to assess that something has been a failure and when to learn from it, but when to also to walk away and try something new. I mean, we love investing in founders who failed several times beforehand, because if you failed, then you've probably learned a lot of lessons. If you've only had successes, then you probably haven't learned as much along the way as those who have failed and who've realized that there are certain ways in which best not to do something. So
yeah, you basically grow your feathers then along the way.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's business, and neither side of the barricade is easier. It just gives another things on the plate to spin and to manage. But your story sounds like it's really rewarding and exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I'm pleased that I took that leap of faith and decided to from knowing nothing about this world to get into it. And certainly I'm very pleased. I very much enjoy the energy behind this innovative tech ecosystem, and certainly I wouldn't reverse the decision to be part of this world.
Speaking of exciting things, I highly recommend finding Tessa's videos and interviews on YouTube. I saw some, and they're really informative and inspiring for startup enthusiasts.
We link some of them to the description of the podcast.
Yes, so I run this weekly series, Startup with Poland. It's been going since I think May last year, April, May, something like this. So almost every week, not every week. We did a break over the summer and Christmas and so on, but I think it's close to 30 now guests that I've interviewed. So really interesting figures from the startup ecosystem, founders, investors, heads of acceleration and incubation programs, quite a mix of different people, but all who are making a very big impact, in my opinion, on the startup ecosystem. So of course, I'm more than happy for anybody who's interested in this world to listen to those interviews and to find out more.
Link to Tessa's YouTube channel in the description below. But also regarding Spotify or Apple Podcast, follow our podcast, turn on the notifications, engage in Q&As. Feel free to reach to us via email, letthetechOut@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram, letthetechOut.com as well, and LinkedIn.
Also, let the tech out. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Tessa, for the conversation. It was really, really interesting, as always.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be your guest.
Perfect. Thank you and see you soon.
Yeah, and hear you soon. Bye.